right. Well, it is 45 after the hour, so we want to welcome everyone. We're so excited that you're joining us today for this session on creating a classroom environment for student well-being. My name is Melissa Schatz, and I'm an account executive here at Branching Minds, and it's my pleasure to kick off this session. Before I do so, just a few housekeeping items. First, if you scroll just below my video, there is a PDF of the session slides. Next, if you look to the right of my video where it says events, agenda, and session, make sure you're clicked on the session tab to engage with this session presenter and attendees. Any chats or questions in the events tab will go to everyone attending the summit. And then under that session tab, we do encourage you to engage in the chat, put questions and answers specifically in that tab for Q&A, because the questions in the chat tend to get lost, but we'll want to address any questions you have at the end. And without further ado, I am going to pass it to your wonderful presenters who will be introducing themselves.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. So hopefully you have found the session you were hoping for. This one is creating a classroom environment for student well-being. And we are the Nebraska MTSS Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Learning Specialist, or as we call it in Nebraska, SEBL Specialist. I am Mackenzie Rydell. I am one of the 5 SEBL specialists in Nebraska, and we serve regionally throughout the state. And so I serve the Southeastern region, Region 1. I'll let Emily introduce herself.
Thanks, Emily Arkfeld, Social Emotional Behavior Learning Specialist serving Region 2, which you can see there in the orange. My background, and Mackenzie, if you want to do yours also. My background before this position was school social work and community mental health.
And I'm Chandra Essex. I am another of our SEBL specialists for Region 4. So I have the middle of the state. And my background prior to joining our team was in higher education and school counseling.
Awesome. And I previously was a school psychologist. And then we also have Jill and Sarah, who actually presented yesterday on adult wellness. Jill came from special education administration and speech language pathology, and Sarah came from school social work. And so we are a very nicely well-rounded team and excited to serve the state of Nebraska in building out those social, emotional, and behavioral support. We always like to start off with a little quote that kind of brings home the idea of what we are talking about. And I jokingly put a quote in by myself before I could find a good one, and then we just left it in there. So a quote from me today is, connection creates belonging, belonging creates wellness, and wellness creates learning. And I think that just goes to show that we really can't expect our students to learn and achieve what we want academically when we're not creating an environment where they feel safe and connected and where they feel like they really belong, because they aren't able to thrive and really learn beyond those connections. So feel free to quote me on wherever you want, but you also don't need to. That'd be kind of weird. Okay, our objectives today, we're going to talk about what social, emotional, and behavioral learning is and talk a little bit about those benefits. Then we'll explore some strategies and resources to support the whole child within your classroom. And then finally, we'll end with identifying some ways that you as educators can create a classroom environment to promote well-being. We always like to start off with welcoming inclusion activities. These are just quick activities to really gauge the room, maybe gauge learning if you're doing professional development often. But we encourage educators to do this whenever they start their periods or lessons or different content. So we'll do this through Mentimeter. So if you go to menti.com, it'll ask you for a code. And if you type in 4300 6611, it'll bring you to your screen prompt, and you can answer the question, what is one thing you currently do to promote student wellness? So I'll flip over to that screen, and the code is at the top still. If you do go to menti.com, there's also a QR code if you want to scan that. I'll leave that up for a little bit. And we want to know something that you're already doing to promote student wellness. Mental Health Awareness Week into Zenden for students. Oh, I like that. Zenden. It's nice and catchy. SEL groups. Nice. Teaching some of those skills. Themed concepts during lunch and homeroom. Ooh, Mindful Mondays. Check in, check out. Smiling at them, asking them about themselves. Connecting, so important to connect with our learners. Advisory, morning meetings, Wellness Wednesday, mental health check-in. Okay. Lots of morning meetings from responsive classrooms. Nice. Creating gratitude journals. Connecting, listening to students. I know it's so easy to get into the run of things where we're just go, 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 and we're wanting to start on time and get all the things done, but we forget sometimes we just need to pause and just take some time to connect and listen. Calming music, silent time, finding strengths in our students and celebrating them. I love that. Conscious discipline as a teaching tool, valuing student needs. Got a lot of great things coming in. Give it a little longer. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll jump over. We know that you guys are probably already doing some things around student wellness in the classroom. And just remember that you're doing good things and we can always grow, but it's just don't forget of the things you're already doing that are great that you can grow upon, but give yourself credit for things you're already doing. All right, so social, emotional, and behavioral learning and the benefits. As I said, Nebraska calls social, emotional, behavioral learning SEBL, and we have defined it as the systematic process for fostering those social and emotional skills among both students and adults in order to create that safe and supportive environment with positive behavioral and mental health outcomes for all. We do work for Nebraska MTSS, so everything that we're doing, we're trying to build within that multi-tiered system of support. We use these 5 competencies to kind of talk about those skills we're seeing. And when we think of these competencies, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationships, and responsible decision-making, these are skills, but almost more like a construct. And so we like to think of them as, okay, so I'm just gonna skip forward a little bit. So we like to think of them as these skills that we're teaching in the classroom beyond just those kind of large constructs. So like, what is self-awareness? What is social awareness? Like, we kind of think we know, but we made this web and we kind of burst it out to some of those different skills that we might name more explicitly in the classroom. And we actually have bursted that out more in some of our other content. So when we think about self-awareness, we might think about your interest or things that you value, things that are your strengths or your limitations, thinking about some of those emotions, identifying your thought patterns, different skills like that. And a lot of times we are doing some of these things, we're teaching some of these skills maybe more implicitly in our classrooms already, but when we're able to identify where the skills that we're already teaching align with those social emotional competencies, we're able to do it a little bit more explicitly and teach our students the skills that they're learning and then how they can use it in their classroom. And in Nebraska MTSS, we believe that we need these competencies in order to meet some of those behavioral expectations, to show wellness in our lives, to have some of those career readiness skills that we need to be employable in our communities or in our higher education experiences, and to meet the whole child needs. But it kind of goes back and forth, because we also, if we have these expectations or these standards, or we're striving for wellness, we can look at those social, emotional, behavioral skills and see where we might want to grow in that area. And these skills are teachable throughout life. They're things that we can teach littles, but we can also teach older kids, and even adults can grow in these different areas. So we know that students who have strong social emotional skills typically have more positive outcomes. Students with strong SEBL skills are more likely to have better teamwork abilities. They're more likely to be cooperative members of a team. They're more likely to self-advocate, to identify their needs and be able to talk and share about them. They're more resilient. They're more likely to graduate from high school and go on to complete a college degree, or to obtain stable employment and be caring and concerned community members. We like to, when talking in the context of beyond the K-12 classroom, we like to say college, career, and community readiness, because our students ultimately are going to become people who are in our own communities that we're growing them up in. And so not only do we want them to be college ready, we want them to be career ready, but we also want them to be community ready, because then they'll come back into our community and hopefully give back and help sustain and keep our community a healthy place to live and thrive. And then students who have those strong SEBL skills, they're less likely to show emotional distress, have conduct problems, receive public assistance, and have contact with law enforcement. And there's also studies that show decrease in dropout rates. There's a lot of research, and there's some studies that show as early as kindergarten, our students who have those stronger skills are more likely to have better positive outcomes as adults. So even from like the age of 5, those students who have stronger skills are more successful as adults. But then there's also research that shows when students who aren't kindergarten, so older students, you're able to intervene and teach some of those skills at the older age, are still less likely to have some of those risk factors. And so again, this is SEBL is teachable. It's something that we can do across the age range, and it should be prioritized for all grades and not just our little ages.
Thanks, Mackenzie. So as we look at our next section, we want to take of those SEBL skills that we can teach, and we want to explore those strategies and the resources of support from a whole child perspective. So we have this quote, a whole child approach to education is one that honors the humanity of each teacher and student, and it's critical to equitably preparing each student to reach their full potential. This starts by creating environments and belonging and connection for students and adults to engage and thrive. So it's really thinking about the whole child and all of the components of that child, and not just what they show up with maybe in your classroom, what's happening outside of the classroom. So as we dive more into that, we'll learn a little bit more. So when we think about what is the whole child approach, it's talking about 10 different areas potentially. So your physical education, your physical activity, nutritional environment and services, health education, social and emotional climate, physical environment, health services, counseling, psychological, social services, employee wellness, community involvement, and family engagement are all those components that can be wrapped up into this definition that is on the screen of a student-centered framework focusing on alignment and collaboration between various sectors to improve a child's cognitive, physical, social, and emotional wellness. Because we know that if a student is not physically, socially, emotionally, and cognitively present in a classroom, they're not in a position to gain knowledge and to learn. So we want to think about how we help look at all of those components. The next slide talks about how we look at transforming that school environment to be filled with safety and belonging. So as I'm chatting and kind of looking through this slide and explaining it more, I'd love for you to, in the chat, to just put what are some of the things that make you feel safe or make you feel a sense of belonging in an environment. You can think back to when you were in school, in your workplace, in your school. What are some of those things that make you feel safe and a sense of belonging? As those are coming in the chat, we think about the first area for that sense of belonging. And awesome. I'm kind of looking at both ways. I'm looking at the chat and I'm trying to talk to you. That doesn't work as well as I thought it might. But yeah, the structure, the communication, being approachable, intentional listening, strong relationships. Those are key to how you help students just feel like they belong in your room. They belong in your building. They belong in your space. What we want to have and what we need to have to feel that safety and that belonging are the same similar things as to what our students are wanting. It's that foundation of a caring and safe learning community. So we think about what are those shared values and norms that are co-developed as a part of a proactive and positive approach to classroom management. I just want to key in on that positive and proactive approach. I think when we talk about initiatives and we talk about different components that are happening in the classroom, sometimes those can be reactive. And if we think about how we build the relationships on the front side, how we build those social, emotional, behavioral skills, then that's how we can have that proactive and that positive environment so that students can feel a sense of belonging and safety. Consistent routines that include consistent approaches and developing those positive relationships are key when you think about what a young child needs, what an adult needs, what we all need. And so that can really help. And sometimes that looks at regular time for meetings, times that you can engage inside and outside of the classroom for both your students and for your staff. And all of those can help create and transform that environment. So the table on the screen talks a little bit about the school environment, transforming a school environment from one, maybe that more reactive or more rules and negative punishment perspective to that positive and proactive. So an example that's up on the screen is individual teacher discipline practices vary from class to class, communicating different expectations for relationships. 2, I'm more proactive and transforming into shared norms and values that create consistency and positive experience for students. If we think about this one specifically in regards to high school students, if they are in 8 classes during the day and each class has 3 different expectations, then they're having to remember a minimum of 24 different expectations on top of procedures and what they should be, what's expected of them. And so having that shared norm and that shared value is really important, and it helps transform that space for positive student well-being. The CDC has come out with a really neat resource called a Virtual Healthy Schools. And what you'll see on the example, if you see on the middle of the screen, there is an arrow pointing. That means if you see at any time this arrow throughout our presentation, that is a live link. So the slides have been put into the presentation, so you'll have access to our slides, and so you can access this live link. But this is a live link to Jefferson School. Principal Paul takes you and leads you through an interactive tool that demonstrates how the school can support a healthy and academic achievement for students. You or a student can use the school map to learn how the whole school, the whole community, and the whole child model makes Jefferson a healthier place for students and staff. So some of the things that the audience has for resources are for educational professionals. So K through 12, you can have an interest meeting in the needs of the whole child. So you can emphasize looking again at those 10 things that we spoke about earlier. It emphasizes on nutrition, on physical activity, obesity prevention, management of chronic health conditions. And it just looks at all of those components from an educational perspective. How do you include your K-12 teachers, your school administrators, your staff, and local and state departments for health and education? So anybody can take advantage of this resource. It's a great opportunity just to see a different perspective and looking at what the CDC has to offer. So why do we think as active student engagement matters? That is a key component when we think about student wellness. It's a multi-dimensional construct. So on the left hand of the slide, this graphic talks about that construct, and it looks at it from an affective, a behavioral, and a cognitive engagement. So when we think about in our classrooms, in our buildings, how do we engage behaviorally? So having students see this as having students being hand raising, they're watching, their eyes on the teachers, they're answering those questions, they're completing their assignments. They can see what we're doing. The students are doing that. So effective. Those positive feelings towards learning is where you might see that. They're motivated to learn. They're taking responsibility for their learning. They're comfortable talking to their peers and teachers. And then the last piece of that engagement, that cognitive. So are they able to self-regulate? Are they taking risks? Are they monitoring their own progress? They have that metacognition ability and that ability to reflect. So students that have these components in a culture of their classroom and a culture of their building, they report, and students who have higher engagement in schools are less likely to drop out or to get into trouble or inside or outside of school. They're more success on immediate school-related tasks. They're more likely to make healthier life choices, more likely to have healthier social emotional well-being, and more likely to obtain those lucrative careers. So at the bottom of this screen, you'll see a link to an active student engagement webinar that the Nebraska MTSS has created to just further explore what the components are for active student engagement. And that is definitely one thing that we want to dive a little bit deeper into. And there are 4 major elements of that positive construct feedback. So if we think of the first one, establishing the culturally responsive routines and expectations and procedures. So we invest in our students, and that's important. As they participate in their classroom activities, it helps reduce disruptions and allow students to take responsibility of their own learning. Setting those high expectations is so important. As we know in John Hattie's research, the #1 indicator of student success in the classroom with an effect size of 1.46 is teacher estimates of student achievement. So having those high expectations for students has that high return. The second piece is build that positive teacher and student relationships. This happens by greeting students positively at the door, in the morning, when they come back from recess, at different times throughout the day. Engage in conversations with your students. Get to know their likes and their dislikes. What are their interests? Use those interests in those academic lessons. while you're doing a math problem, pull in what their experiences are, what their likes are. We said earlier, I know in the chats, ways that people felt safe and belonging is by listening and being present. And then that last piece is just really, as an educator, having that trust and that mutual respect, the intentionality and the optimism. The third piece for active student engagement is using a variety of strategies that ensure student engagement. So whether that's a Kahoot for that student response system, you can do engaging assignments, so that peer instruction, the jigsaw, concept mapping, discussions, opportunities for response, doing think, pair, shares, restorative circles is a great component for active student engagement, and just interactive experiences. So problem project learning and collaborative pair learning. Actively monitoring is the last component. So monitoring that engagement and providing ongoing specific feedback. Thinking look-fors, what's that physical reaction? Are they laughing? Are they engaged? Are they smiling? Are they tracking you? Are they taking notes? That can give you an idea of a very specific feedback of how they are doing in the classroom. So there's some more examples up on this screen of just some, and it's from this High Expectations presentation that's linked on this screen on the bottom of the slide, of how to actively engage students in their learning. So again, use of flexible grouping, providing students with choices, asking more open-ended questions. So I gave a lot of those examples in the first slide, or in the previous slide, but these have some more specific examples. Really important is maximizing that student voice and choice, being able to give them that opportunity to share what their interests are and what really is motivating for them and helps them feel safe. When we foster an inclusive environment where each student is valued and respected and empowered, we create that culturally inclusive classroom that ensures each student has the access to those core practices. And we do this by valuing and embracing each other's differences and perspectives and their points of view, intentionally planning learning that valued students' lived experiences, their realities, their cultural identities, and their heritages. Those are important. Those are welcomed, and that we support and partner with a wide representation of community agencies. So really gathering in what's happening in our communities. These are all important pieces for student well-being, because again, those are some of the components that help them feel safe and belonging. So I talked briefly about that student voice and choice, and it's really just helping understand, whoops, I got off on my slides. There we go. I went one more ahead. I was really excited. So this is, and I don't want to miss this. Actually, that's really funny. So when we think about UDL, we think about universal design and a cross section with SEL. Lisa Bozai, Bazio, I'm going to slaughter that name. I'm really bad at names, from the Novak Education. She said that what we know about learning is all about learning is social and emotional. So universal design is that research-based framework for teaching and learning based on how people learn. Essentially, that UDL learning environment is the emotional readiness, the psychological safety, and the self-regulation that students need for deep learning and for growth. The graph above, that table above, allows you to see the cross sections, the twofers, as she would say in the article, the CASEL core competencies combined with related UDL guidelines and checkpoints, and how it ties into a big connection. So it just really shows you how you can use those cross sections and really help encompass that social and emotional learning. So if we look at the first one, self-awareness, the ties to the UDL guidelines and checkpoints, the big connection that is, if we are giving students agency over their learning, they must know themselves, their interests, their goals, their strengths, and their weaknesses, and help them make that approach of learning choices. So it's that voice and choice that students have, and helping them find those pieces in the classroom. When we think about student voice and choice, we think about how we are regularly soliciting students' feedback, how we are engaging students in study and assessing their school, asking them for feedback, asking them questions. And it's not just questions on surveys that adults have created, but giving the students the tools to create their own assessments, their own surveys, to ask their peers to get feedback from them, and to really give valuable data and information on what's happening that works in their school and what is not working, including that authentic student representation on leadership teams. Having principals leave space for students on school leadership teams, improvement teams, equity and diversity teams. We know this can be a little nervous, I think, for some. Nervous is probably not the right word, but it can be a little unsettling maybe for some staff to think that they may have a student on a team. If you're looking at MTSS data, understanding though, you're just looking at the school as a whole. You're not looking at individual students in those activities and those teams that your students are a part of. But they are so important in that voice of what's happening, and they are the ones that can really give you that insight. In addition to also doing that with your staff, which I'm sure our colleagues talked about yesterday in their staff presentation, but really making sure that you're including them in those leadership teams. Inviting students to any discussion related to their own learning, and then more broadly considering youth as stakeholders and partners in their schools. So when school leaders are setting those new goals and you're making major decisions, expect for those students to contribute. At the same time, educators should be willing to help students as they shape and achieve their own aspirations in their learning. So as we're teaching them to be that future community member, that future leader in our community, going to college, going to a career, those are the pieces that if we start at a young age and we engage them into the leadership opportunities, they will have had that experience, and that'll be another step ahead that they will have when they get out of high school and go into that workforce or into college or into the community. Restorative practices is a great way to have that student well-being approach in your buildings. This is a practice that happens that is just a part of what you're doing. It's not an additional thing. It's just a part of what you're doing. And on the screen, you see the continuum of restorative practices and the different steps that you can find within it. The key pieces is just remembering that if you're doing any type of restorative practices in your buildings, that you're doing the 80-20 type of a role. So 80% of your work is preventative. You're proactively building healthy relationships, that sense of community. Again, you're reducing, you're preventing, you're improving that student behavior, which is going to improve safety. You are looking specifically at how you're improving the school climate and the culture that's going to improve the inclusion. Improve relationships between students and educators, and even between educators and our community. So those behaviors for students to serve as role models for other students. They allow each member in the school community to develop and implement the adopted school core values. And then 20% of your time is really looking at how the responsive side of restorative practices. So how are you repairing the community? How are they repairing and restoring those relationships? And that is a community engagement that is all sorts of stakeholders sitting at the table, not just one or two. So it's really important to think about that, which is just another example of a way that you can really focus on student well-being. So this slide talks about and which ties into restorative practices. It talks about where you want to be in regards to the social discipline window. So if you'll see on the graphic to your left, it has two axes. It has an axis of support and an axis of control. And as you go out, it's more support. As you go up, it's more control. So where as an educator might you be? What area are you operating out of? If we think about the not, which is the bottom left hand, that might be the neglectful category. So that might mean as an educator, you may have low control or low support in your classroom. So you're not paying attention to the class at all. It's a chaotic classroom. Students can kind of do whatever they want. And this might be an environment that some students like, but students may not be successful in. So then if you go up on the control side to the top left is the 2. It's that punitive. So the high control, that high support, high expectations, you hold accountable, no scaffolding to allow the students to get that academic or that achievement, frustration from a teacher, doing to not meet the expectations. So there's lots of punitive punishments. It's that authoritarian. You set the rules. You need to make sure that people know how to do it. And if the students don't follow it, that's their problem because they should just know how to do it. That is something that may not be the most engaging, most well-being experience for students, but understanding that as an educator, you're going to be probably in all 4 of these quadrants at different times. And so it's really knowing who you are, knowing how you're approaching and creating that environment with a goal of trying to be in the with. So if we go back down onto the bottom axis, and if you look at the 4, which is the bottom right, that's the permissive. So the high support, the low control. So those students love the class. They love the teacher. The teacher knows all the things about the students. The teacher's going to bend the rules for some students because the relationship they have. But when it comes to learning, the students aren't going to meet those learning expectations. And I specifically think about my high school math teacher. She was a first-year teacher. She was very close to us in age. She knew us well. She related to us well, but we got her off task really easily, really, really quickly. And so I think our learning didn't happen as much as it could have. And then the last category, that last quadrant, is the with. And that's where we really want to try to strive to be out of when we think about student wellness and student belongingness, because it's that high control and that high support. You're supporting those expectations and the accountability, and where you show that care about the student, but again, you have that high expectation, which we know from Hattie's research is so important for student success. So we think about all of these components in addition to those that we've shared, and those are some of the strategies that you can use in approaching that whole child approach.
Thank you, Chandra. So we're going to get into our last objective here, identifying how educators can create a class environment for well-being. And you guys put a lot of really wonderful things in the Menti. Thank you for that. You're already doing so many of these things. And then, so as we go along, if there are, so I know Kristen already put in some information about her Zenden. Thank you for that. So if there are things that come up that we talk about that you are doing, you think you do well, please put that in the chat so that you guys can learn from each other. We like to see the engagement. If there's questions, please drop them in there. But otherwise, we will finish this up and get you out of here. So when we think about the positive learning environment, I know this looks like a long list of like, oh my gosh, I have to be doing all of these things. And yes, we want to see all of these things. But again, these are already things that teachers and educators are doing, staff are doing in their classrooms and their buildings every day. You do these things naturally. This is why you got into teaching. I mean, these are just natural things that we know are good for kids and put into place. But getting to know those students and then letting them know you also. So Chandra mentioned the teacher who was close in age and spoke on the level and all of that. And that's fantastic. And we need to do that with some boundaries in place, but letting your kids know who you are, what are your interests, what does your family look like, what are your experiences, and bringing that to the classroom too, because that is really relevant in that building that environment for belonging for all, addressing individual needs. And I think some of that goes back to that universal design for learning, that if we're putting things in place that we know are good for learners, then everyone benefits. And so if you have a couple students who have some different needs around some regulation or some academic learning or some of those pieces. And so we just put those practices in place for everyone to have access to, then everyone benefits from that. Because one day I might be a audio learner and I'm really good and I'm taking in that information. But if I come to school in the morning and I'm tired and I'm just not fully there, maybe I need to be reading something that day instead of hearing it. So having access to the different types of learning for all students really promotes that inclusive environment for all. Giving student voice and choice, we've talked a lot about that, and you guys put that in as things that you felt teachers or educators or you try to do right now in your own building. So experiences you've had, and that's of value to you. Being consistent. Again, like Chandra said, if you have a bunch of expectations in different classes, that's a lot of things. And so the more you can have consistent expectations within your classroom, within your buildings and your schools, the better. It just takes some of that pressure off the students to have to remember, what am I supposed to be doing here? And what do I do with my cell phone in this class? And where can I sit in this class? So then again, it goes in that clear and positive expectations and inviting room, which I think was mentioned. The Zen Den is fantastic as an outside space that students can go to. Can we build something within our room that is also an inviting space to be? I just did put together some information on possible triggers for sensory overwhelm. And, we like to have oil diffusers and smell good things and bright colors. I'm a total bright color lover. I love all things rainbow and give me all the bright stuff, but recognizing that might be overwhelming for some students. So how can we make our room inviting for all? Chandra talked a lot about engagement and challenging our kids and holding them to those high expectations. A community of learners. We want kids to be there and asking questions and engaged and involved in the learning that we're doing. And then we celebrate failure, challenges, and success. So we want to always celebrate the small wins, but we want our students to feel challenged. We are all going to mess up at some point. And so learning how to not do something well and to try back again, or to try again, can really help them with that resilience. That growth mindset of just because I'm not good at something right off the bat doesn't mean that I can't get good at something. And so we'll kind of go into some more examples of all of these things, but we've gone through a lot and we'll give some specific resources around these as well. And we know the heart of what we do is build those relationships. Everything comes down to that. And so that is our tier 1 core practices. The more we can focus on building those relationships, the rest of the things fall into place. It's that foundation for student engagement. Even if they come in and they like a subject and they're excited about a subject, if there is not a relationship, they don't buy into what the teacher is up there teaching or talking about, then that love for that subject, or it can end up being a hard class. And so really trying to build those relationships for that student engagement. Those relationships provide that sense of belonging. Even you don't have to like all the same things, do all the same things, have all the same experiences to feel like you belong if you are building relationships. And then those safe and supportive learning environments for students to ask questions, to not know something, to screw up. And the more they feel safe doing that, the more they're willing to step outside of their comfort zone and take on new challenges because they know it's okay to mess up and try again. Thank you guys. Yeah, diffusers, rainbow lights, things that we love and are great and fantastic, but I have to think about people, everyone. Linked into this is a Making Connections toolkit. It has some of the resources we will share, a bunch of other resources just about ways to build relationships with student to student, staff to student, staff to staff. It probably was shared in our colleagues one yesterday, but it's a fantastic just list of a bunch of resources out there for you. Student check-ins, again, you guys had some of these on the Mentimeter. This again is a long list, but really just wanted to show that you can build this into so many different parts of your day. It doesn't just have to be a morning meeting. It doesn't have to be daily. It doesn't have to be, only during advisory, but how can you build these little pieces to check in with your students, for you to check in as a staff also. So You can do it before a lesson. So if you've got a hard lesson coming up and you know it's a challenging one, so doing a check-in like a fist to 5, how are you feeling about what we're going to be learning today? This is going to be a tough one, and giving students an opportunity to do that quick, like 1, like, whoo, well, however you have it set up. But 1 is like not so great, 5's like ready to rock and roll, let's do this. And if you see that you've got a lot of 1s and 2s and kids are nervous or not feeling great about it, how can you adjust your teaching to really honor that where they're coming in for that morning or for that lesson. Oh my gosh, before student conferences is a pre-meeting tool. So especially if you're doing like student-led conferences or something, using these check-ins with your students to see how they're feeling about their learning, how they're feeling about the conference that they're going to be having, talking to their parents about their academic learning or anything like that. At the end of a lesson to capture immediate feedback, again, that fist to 5 or some other way opportunity to respond, to get an idea where how people are feeling. Are they leaving like they know the information? Are they leaving completely overwhelmed? And if 90% of your class is like, I have no idea what we just talked about, you take that feedback and put it into place for your next lesson. Newer challenging content, we talked about that. Preparation for returning to or from, in preparation for or returning from a extended break. So we're coming up here on winter break. And for some kids that is fantastic and they're looking forward to it, 2 full weeks at home with caregivers and presents and all of the wonderful things, but that's not true for all of our students. And so perhaps it's something that they are going in anxious about or nervous about or worried about. And so doing a check-in on that. And then coming back also for those kids who were super excited about being home for 2 weeks can be a big adjustment. So taking some time to really check in with them and to get them, transitioned back into the school. Maybe you're doing it as school-wide programming. So people said SEL groups, SEL lessons. So maybe that's already something that's built in. Perhaps you're doing it instead of daily attendance. So they come in and they do a check-in on Menti or something. You use all of those wonderful teaching apps out there for them to check in with how they're feeling. You can use a variety of things, feelings wheels. You can do like the Inside Out characters. You can just do like a 1 to 10. Where am I at today? Worst day ever, best day ever, whatever that might look like for you. And then, yes, during an advisory period. So then again, we have a bunch of things listed in here. We have that share out on there. So if you guys are feeling up to it and want to share, dropping in the chat, just what are ways maybe you are already doing student check-ins. I know I gave you a lot of things, but what does that look like in your own classrooms or in your school? We have the positive greetings at the door handout, and Chandra touched on that also. So, and elementaries and secondary buildings, just being at the door and welcoming them in, trying to say their name when you see them. If you're in the hallway, I think Lisa maybe mentioned that, yes, Lisa. So you're a regional role and you are in multiple buildings. But you try your best when you see students to help them know that you are a safe and good person to talk to. And so maybe just if you see kids in the hallway and you know their name, saying hello to them, a smile to them. It doesn't have to be at the door, but anytime you run in the cafeteria, out at recess, making connections with students there, welcoming them back if they've been gone for a while, instead of being, well, where have you been? And you missed all this stuff. But oh my gosh, Mackenzie, it's so good to see you. I'm glad you're back. We missed you. Any of those kinds of things. I felt like I had something else to say about that, but maybe it'll come back to me as we continue on. So, okay. So this is our wonderful colleague, Heather Robbins. She is a national consultant for PBIS. She puts together these beautiful welcoming activity slide decks. She's done a few school years now. So there's like 180 some odd slides in these slide decks. And so we've linked in a couple of them for you. So this is something you could use. You could pull the whole thing up. It's already ready and to go for you. If you don't want to do extra work, you just pull the whole thing up, and maybe the kids get to choose which one they do that day. Maybe they work through all of them throughout the day if they're with you for the whole day. If you just want to pull out one, maybe it's a morning check-in. Maybe you are doing circle time, and so you want to use the prompt for the share out circle. maybe they need a brain break, or everyone's kind of feeling dysregulated, maybe we do the video for a mindful moment and we just do some deep breathing. And so wonderful, wonderful collection of resources in here. Again, for the whole school year, ready just to like take and go. So that is linked in for you. Oh, I want to click my slide and that's not my job. Here's another resource, 36 questions to increase connectedness at school. And again, using these, so they are fantastic to use in your classrooms. You can use them in staff meetings. You can use them staff to staff. I think Chandra put in here the 60-second relate breaks, brain breaks, movement breaks, any of those kinds of things where you're transitioning from one activity to another. You notice that the kids are just kind of getting a little funky. You yourself is like, you're just kind of up to here in your patience level and you need this like a moment to breathe and step away from things. Also with the questions, like I said, you don't have to like have all the same likes as your students. It's not possible. It's not going to happen. But when you use these kinds of, when you have these questions and you put them into place, whether it's through the variety of check-ins like we talked about, whether it's 60-second relate breaks, whatever you're doing, the more that you learn about your kids and your kids learn about you, then you have something you can say to them. So they're coming, you're greeting them at the door and you say, hey, Melissa, you know that Melissa likes video games, not my area. But hey, Melissa, I noticed that this new video game came out last night. Are you going to get it? Or have you played it yet? Or something. And you don't have to know anything about it, but you can certainly ask a question if you know they're interested in it. I used to work with a kid who created roller coasters online, and it was like his most favorite thing to do. I knew zero about it, but he came in for a session one time with his computer and showed me all about these roller coaster and the that he had created. They were amusement parks, set up all these things. We went through it. And so it was a student that I had trouble connecting with on other things. He wouldn't really open up and talk about things, but my goodness, once we had this whole time just to talk about this wonderful thing that he loved to do and was good at and enjoyed, he came in then more willing to talk about other things. And so using those to just build those relationships. Okay, you can click on. This is another one, me too, that's me game. There's some other icebreaker questions in here, but this is one where someone says a statement, and if it's also you, then you can stand up. We played it. So we've been doing the restorative practices training with Allie Hearn, and she did it where you stood up in the middle and everyone's in a chair, basically like musical chairs. And you say, I like people who like to knit. And so anyone who likes to knit also stands up and they move chairs. And so again, like what a wonderful way to get to know people, find common interests, and a movement break as well, because you're up and moving your body. So great ways to kind of incorporate that into your days in a variety of ways. Pet rat. Sorry, I just saw the comment come in. That is an interesting one and fantastic. And you could, easily you can ask about it and find out information. So learning buddies, similar to like peer mentors, but this is just an opportunity to maybe foster some relationships that wouldn't naturally occur, but perhaps they are students who, they have a common interest through, student check-ins and all of those kinds of things, finding out about your kids. And so they can check in with each other. If they need help completing an assignment, organizing their desk, choosing a book from the library, a variety of things. And this should be, I do want to know, I feel like this should be a mutual thing, where it's not just one student who's always helping out the other student. And is there a way that both of these students might need some extra support, or are we just butting up everyone? Because I saw something where, in a classroom, students got their incentive program tickets for PBIS tickets for being a good friend or being caring or being inclusive, whatever it might have been. And so they all knew the student who needed a little extra support, and they all wanted to help that student, but there was trouble in knowing, is that true? Are they truly wanting to help the student because they feel connected, they want the student to belong and they want to help out? Or is it because they know that they could then get these tickets, which then get them other incentives and good things. And so making it be just a mutually inclusive thing where it's helpful for all students and it's not just one or two students that have learning buddies. So just a note on that. I think that's important. We think about classroom design. We talked about some of this stuff, but really being intentional in your lighting and your acoustics and your noise. There's not a lot we can do about the nasty lights in our schools usually, but if you can use lamps and things instead of the overhead lights, or I know they have the covers for the lights also, a way just to kind of not have such that harsh artificial lighting blazing down on all of us all day long. Background noise, just being intentional about the level of the noise if you have music playing, what you might be playing, keeping it kind of quiet and low level and nothing too jarring. If you can, if you are lucky enough to have a window and you can open your windows, can we do that on these nice days and get some airflow through there? We definitely have no control over our HVAC system, and that is like a common bugaboo in schools, but the best you can have some control if you can have an air filter or something like that. Complexity and color, again, bright things are fantastic, and I hate to have to say this, but can we keep it simple, visually stimulating without trying to be super overwhelming in your color scheme and things like that? I see the string of lights. Yes, having just a calming space that draws people in is fantastic. We want our classrooms to be representative of our students, and we'll get into a couple ways to do that, but displaying non-academic work and images, bringing students' passions and their background and their experiences into the classroom in whatever way feels right for you as a class. And then flexibility and learning zone. So a variety of seating options, because we all know it's super hard to sit very still in some of those desks all day, and spaces. So can we, spaces for group learning that's comfortable, some flexible seating for kids who just need something a little bit different. And we'll get into what some of those examples might look like. Again, drop things in the chat if you have had success with something, if you tried something and it really didn't work, so we can learn from your experiences. So these are just a variety of classrooms. We want to keep them well organized, not super cluttered. Again, we want them to be safe spaces. So we want students and the staff to be able to move freely through the desks. The one on the left, again, bright things, that one always stands out to me, but I think it's organized. It's not overwhelming. I'm assuming this is a younger grade class where they have space to be on the floor and on the mat and things like that. We have the flexible seating up in the top middle-ish, and then you can't see it in the picture, but on the windows are pictures of their faces. So again, representative of who they are, and the kids can see themselves in the classroom. The one with the palm trees. So these have little lights in it, and it was again in a younger classroom. And the teacher said, okay, if you can follow the expectations, the palm trees will stay in the classroom. And to most people's surprise, the students were able to continue to do what they needed to do, and the palm trees and the lights stayed up all year long. So again, high expectations, and then holding the expectations and being consistent, and the students really came through and were able to enjoy this kind of cool, extra fun space because they were doing what they were supposed to be doing or asked to do. And then the one with the desk with the yellow tape. So this was a student who had some trouble wandering around, getting up out of a seat and being in spaces where he wasn't supposed to be. And so the teacher put some yellow tape around the desk for him so that he could still get up, he could move, he could go around to the side, he could do whatever, but as long as he was in his yellow space, then he was fine. And so that cut down on his wandering. And then it just had other supports for him. So headphones, if things got too loud and he was feeling overwhelmed, he could put on his headphones. There were some calming strategies on his desk that he could use. And so really just provided this space inside the classroom. It wasn't tucked back in the corner. It was still inclusive. It just had some parameters around it for him. Okay. I think we're good on this one. I'm going to check the chat really quick too. Yes, perfumes, definitely perfumes and colognes, scented lotions. I think it's tricky because we talk about for like regulation, calming strategies, things like that, like, oh, put on a lotion and put on a scented lotion. And that's one of the things that's often recommended, but also can be super triggering for other people. And so again, being careful of that. So thank you for that. LED strip lights and random kids pick the color. Like, I think sometimes that we think we have to do big stuff as like rewards or incentives for our kids, but yes, having LED lights where they get to like pick a color or have fun colors for a 30-second dance party or something, like these are the things that kids actually like enjoy doing. And so, oh my gosh, it's 1:45.
I was just like, I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
It went so-
Okay, can I have like 30 seconds? I'll go fast.
Of course.
Okay, if you need to jump off, please jump off, but I promise to finish out this fast. Other flexible seating, again, like rows so that people can move safely. Okay, move on. Again, you guys should have these slides. Regulation spaces, so having movement breaks, things outside and inside for them in the hallways. These are great spaces. The Calm Down Cove has some breathing strategies up there for them and different movement things that they can be doing. A bunch of links in there, brain breaks, virtual calming room, things like that to use in your classroom. Student voice in the classroom, so common norms, things like I wish my teachers knew or student interest survey. Again, like Chandra said, then putting that into your academic lessons to like bring in their passions and things that they enjoy. Student feedback forms for maybe your higher levels of like, is my teaching working for you? Are there things that you need? Or are there things that I'm not, providing? And so taking that and putting that into place. Someone mentioned following up on things that they had said. And so if you do student feedback forms, making sure then you do make a change or you do have a conversation with them afterwards about that. Here's a bunch of opportunities to provide student choice and a link on how to demonstrate different ways students can demonstrate learning. It doesn't have to be one way or the highway. Again, it goes back to that universal design for learning of letting learners learn the way that they do best. This is the best part of me, where students get to identify what they think the best part of them is and then give reasons. So on here, this was in a class in a school. And so like my hair, and these are all the reasons that my hair is my best part of me, and my hands and things like that. So really that bringing that culture background experience into the classroom. Similar with this next one, with the name, the story of my name. So they get to talk about how their name came about and why they were named that name. And again, if we can say their names correctly and take the time to learn them instead of just giving them a nickname because it's hard to say, brings so much value to them. And so I love this, that they get to tell their story of the name also, because it's so important. It's who we, so much about who we are. Parent and caregiver involvement, sending good notes home, positive phone calls home, using surveys. What do you want me to know about your kid? What do you think your kid's strengths are? Is there anything I can do to help when your kid's having a hard day? Those kinds of things, keeping that lines of communication open. Okay, so take this as a reflection on your way out before your break. Definitely take your break, refill your coffee, do what you need to do. Those are super important. Get away from the screen. But what are ways, again, you're already doing this. Maybe there are some things that we talked about that you could add. When I do foster all of these areas and really build upon this, what impacts do I see? And then are there school-wide efforts to reinforce this? And so if you want to reflect on this, take this back to your teams, whatever that might look like. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I'm sorry that I got wordy and went over. I was thinking we'd actually be short. If there are any questions, we will happily stay on here and answer those. Otherwise, please take your break and whatever else Melissa needs to say.
No, thank you all so much. That was really wonderful. Love learning about all the tips and tricks for creating well-being in your classroom. So there is a 15-minute break, and then we have our final keynote for the day. Thank you for everyone who engaged in the sessions, and to Emily, Chandra, and Mackenzie. It was great to see you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.